Greetings, everyone, and welcome along to Wednesday at James Chapel. As we're gathering and beginning today, I want to invite us to a moment of calm and of quiet, and a moment to take a breath. Maybe you might position yourself seated in some way, or at least in some sort of position that allows you to feel the ground on your cushion or flat beneath your toes. If you're hearing my voice, perhaps you might feel comfortable enough to close your eyes. If there are worries or stressors, anxieties, taking a moment to set them down, because you can pick them up later. And take one big deep breath in through your nose. And hold it there just a moment. And then release it gently and slowly out through your mouth. And then trying that one more time. And perhaps you might bring your attention back to the room wherever you are sitting or listening to us. Wiggle your fingers and your toes. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Sip coffee next, or whatever helps enliven, awaken. So we planned today's chapel long before all of the horror that has happened so far this week took place. So we're all kind of playing it by ear. So what I hope that we have today is an opportunity for all of us to have a little bit of pause and a little bit of time to notice spiritually how we are across our many traditions, and to notice the different energies and the different spiritual inputs that make us who we are and that make our community what it is. And that there are so many spiritual inputs that we're all receiving always at the same time. One of those inputs that we're receiving broadly as a community is that today is the start of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and our guest in chapel today is Mudang Sung Park. Sung is a mudang, which is a word for, in Korean traditions, a word for one who consults with spirits. We would use the English language word of shaman to describe the work that he does. So I'm going to invite Sung to say a little bit about what he's bringing to us today, and then we're just going to sort of like have a chat, because the world is not the world that it was, even. That's right, Dean Montez, that it was yesterday, or frankly, before the sun arose this morning, for those of you in our community who are in difficult circumstances, know that we stand with you. So I'm going to stop talking and invite Sung to chat with us a little bit.
Hello, everybody. Sorry. Hi. Sorry. I'm just gonna turn so I can just face everybody. Hi. So I just want to say welcome and thank you for being here. I actually finished my M.Div here at Union in 2014. I studied under Dr. Cohn, and I would have to say he pretty much changed my entire course of how I look at, in the moment, during that time, theology. But I also want to say this is one of those moments where Spirit works in very mysterious but very sensible ways. Hi, Sue. So in undergrad, I had the experience of doing campus organizing where we shut down the school, and I was also expelled, and we went through the whole the whole gamut. And so I think as I was watching everything that was going down the street, it just made sense why I couldn't really pick a point of focus to discuss at chapel until this morning. And so one of the things that I did want to just kind of share with you is that, and Sue kind of knows my journey, I was a very staunch Presbyterian. I was under care at a RCA and Presbyterian church while I was at Union. Toward the end of my days at Union, my father passed away suddenly. And so I had to tend to his kind of affairs. And I grew up in Brooklyn, so it wasn't like I didn't have to disrupt my studies. But I found myself completely lost as to how to commemorate him. And I had grown up in the Korean American Presbyterian Church that has, over the course of my lifetime, has told me that it is heretical for us to continue our ancestral practice. And so I have very early memories from my family of doing ancestral veneration, and then one day just suddenly stopped without any word. And when I had asked as a child, all they were saying to me was, well, the church said we can't do this as Christians. And so it just completely stopped. And I think as a person who's living in the diaspora and who has held this longing for what we call tradition and homeland, or the motherland, it was kind of a big blow. When my father passed, the fact that I didn't know how to really memorialize my own parent was a very deep wound. And from there, And it was right before I started writing my thesis, coincidentally. And so when I started to really dive into the thesis, I started to think about what it meant to feel so disembodied. And even as a Christian and being so deeply involved in the church and for having a lifetime in the church, what it meant to feel so untethered and so disembodied to the point that I just felt like I was flapping in the wind. And that's when I realized that I really needed to examine my journey within the frame of Christian imperialism, right? And what it's done to, at least for me personally, in terms of severing our tradition, and severing a lot of our people from our tradition. And effectively, what it has done is to sever us from our ancestors and our connections to our ancestors. And so I received actually a very generous associate pastorship at the church that I was under care at right after I finished my M.Div. And my heart just dropped to my stomach the minute they offered me the job. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting reaction that my body is having. And I just looked at the senior pastor and I said, I can't do this. And that was actually the last time I was in church. And then I found myself really longing and doing a deep dive around a search for Korean indigenous practices. And it took me about another 5 to 6 years. And when I received my first reading, actually my first reading of my entire life, everything just kind of fell into place. All the things that made me like the weird kid growing up, all the things that I had attributed to church or my connection to the Holy Spirit ended up being the calling of my ancestors, right? And just to give you a very, very truncated history of Korea, as you all know, like Korea is divided into North and South Korea at this point, US military and what they call intervention. And that was at the end of a decades-long Japanese occupation of our land. During that time, there were many attempts to erase a lot of our history, our presence, and our tradition. And part of that was Musok is actually the indigenous practice of spiritual practice of Korea. And they've made many attempts to erase the practice and the history and the tradition. And so what I actually wanted to talk about as I was on the train coming here, it just kind of hit me. I want to talk about resilience. And I want to talk about resilience under state violence, which is very much what is happening, right, in our lives at this point. And what happens when the oppressor becomes the aggressor? Like, how do we then, as people of spirit, rise up to meet the moment? And it doesn't mean that everyone has to be at the front line getting arrested, right? So what are our roles and what are we okay in terms of holding on for resilience and resilience to thrive, right? Not just to survive, but to thrive. For me, there are moments when I do lament the loss of very specific parts of our tradition, our spiritual tradition, because it is an oral tradition, right? So there is nothing written, there isn't a curriculum, there isn't a didactic lesson plan for you to follow. And so I do know that there have been many parts of our practice that have been lost through occupation and war. And yet we're still here, right? And the moment that I got initiated as a shaman, my cousin, who is also a PK, a pastor's kid, she asked me, she was like, so how do you feel now? And without even thinking, the first words out of my mouth was, I feel complete. And so I want to really kind of maybe, I don't know if I'm gonna be putting folks on the spot, but like if we can have like an open discussion around like, how do we view this like resilience and this connection to spirit, right, in this moment? And how do we look at that as a means of not just survival, but also to thrive? I'm gonna pick on you, Pauli.
Yeah, that's very fair. The notion of resilience for me, Sung knows a bit of my story and a bit of my moving on from Christian clergy preparation and body stuff of massive recovery as well. So I suppose resilience, both spiritually and physically, is something that I have a little bit of experience with. I think number one, for me, resilience is always something that's done in community. It's never something that's done alone, because alone maybe it's not a physical death, but it's very hard to just survive alone, let alone thrive alone, because I don't think that any of us are actually built to be alone for any longer than I think is absolutely necessary. Like we're built for community and built to help each other survive. I think hence why we're all here. Like this is a moment where, as you were saying, some people have different gifts to give than others. Some people, the time in my life when I was helping to de-arrest protesters in housing solidarity and George Floyd solidarity in 2020, that time is not now, right? But that time is the right time for someone else in this community to be the people who are acting in that particular way. There are, just in the same way that the work that we're doing of providing spaces of care and rest and breath and pause in this space today, there was someone who was doing that work, like while I was on a acclaimed ball field at the foot of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, right? One of the things that I worry about, that I see as I'm walking in, looking at my phone, a really wise Buddhist friend pointed out to me this morning. If you look at the coverage on the New York Times and NPR, we got the staff email about some of the intentions around the Morningside campus across the street, sometime like late yesterday afternoon, I think. I don't remember exactly. Barely 10 minutes after that email came around to the all-staff server, there was an NPR story and there was a New York Times story detailing what was going on. And the hypervigilance of that and the isolation of that does a really good job of helping us forget that none of us have to do this work alone. Certainly none of us have to do all of this work, and none of us should do all of this work. And that I think the sense of immediacy and urgency and panic and the need for unilateral focus to just drop everything, to drop your center, to drop your peace, to drop your calm, I think that that's very dangerous for what feels like sustained, gentle movement work. That if we are always panicking and always anxious all the time, we know from science that it will physically kill us. Like it will drive our bodies and our minds and spirit to ruin. And I think the reminder to breathe and to hydrate and to eat and to sleep in between all of these periods of work feels important. That not every moment is a state of emergency. I'll start there. I'll pose the question to people who are here. And for those who are comfortable sharing, what are you noticing in yourself? What are you noticing in your friends? As you've seen this sort of movement work over the last couple of hours, over the last couple of days, over the last couple of weeks, what rises to the surface about what you've seen? And if there's anybody who would like to share.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you for coming and sharing your story. I feel like for a moment I could sort of visualize a being kind of walking backwards in order to walk forward. And I before Union, I consumed a great quantity of Korean dramas, reading subtitles, just wishing I could be a Korean.
You have really good taste. Exquisite.
So one of the things I'm moved by is just kind of, to speak on resilience and everything, is the fact that when you tell your story, you affirm that you were here, you were present, and that whatever is trying to erase you has not succeeded. And so, and I feel like this is a moment that is important to tell our stories of resilience in whatever capacity it is. For me, it's recovery. Something tried to kill me, and I am still here. In spite of me, in a lot of cases, I am still here. In the story of my people, 400 years of people trying to kill us, erase us, wipe us out, and we're still here. And that was a message to one of my favorite humans, Wizard Bizon, on Instagram, is, there are stories to hold on to that will carry you through this. And the more we tell these stories, the more we solidify that truth in the moment, anchor it, right? And so the last thing I thought was that, I think I had this backwards. I've been kind of feeling a little depressed around, the police response. However, there is an enormous amount of beauty in every campus that has had an encampment, that has made a statement, that has showed up. That is remarkable, and that is the story. And there's no way you could do that without a pushback. And so I'm not going to let the pushback define this moment, right? There's something else rising up. Thank you.
Hearing the bells of the clock and the gentle silence of the room, I'd like to prepare us to move back out into the world and to close our time together. Perhaps you might take another deep breath. Sung, go for it.
I just wanted to also say that if anyone had questions about our practice or tradition, I'm open to that as well. But what I actually did want to say lastly was we are all a product of our ancestors. And whether or not we can see them or feel them or smell them, and sometimes I can actually have all those sensory experiences, right, as I'm sitting with folks. But we are all a product of our ancestors, and they're all with us, right? And I think that that is the one thing that a lot of churches don't usually touch on. And when we talk about spirit work, we need to start with our ancestors. It doesn't matter if you know who they are. As someone who immigrated as a child, I don't have a direct line to folks beyond like my parents or even my grandparents. Like my grandparents on my father's side, I don't even really have a memory of them, right? But I know that I am of them, right? I am of them, and therefore they are of me too. So I would really love for folks to just kind of carry the fact that we are always in relationship with and to them.
I thank you so much for your story and especially your questions about resilience. I'm sure that even if we're not sharing, that we're thinking about, the things that we've dealt with. One of the things that I'm very grateful for is being indigenous, and Hungrepi and I talk about this a lot, about how our indigenous roots are kind of first before our religious, right? Like it was taken away from us, like you were saying, very early on, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus. So I would love to hear about, like, I know that you have your beads, and I know that there are different prayers, but what keeps you grounded along with your beliefs and along with your ancestors, but what keeps you grounded when going through?
That's a great question. I mean, I have moments of spiraling too. And I do remember the last time I really, truly spiraled. They actually all showed up in my dream and was kind of, I guess, symbolically like slapping me around to be like, get a hold of yourself. But really, for me, and one thing that I really deeply got into in this tradition is that everything starts and ends with prayer. And that also happens on a literal sense too. So I start my morning in prayer and I end my evenings in prayer. And the prayer really does help ground me. And sometimes it's not even about the words, right? It's just sitting there and just feeling their presence. And that is something that, that I have learned to do but continue to do. And I think what you said is really poignant too, because some of what has happened when a tradition that is not indigenous to us gets placed on us, there is a separation that happens between spirit and life, right? But for us and for all the indigenous practices that I know of, regardless of culture, spirit and life were the same thing, right? So Musok is based in animism, which means that we believe everything has spirit, right? The grass that's on the lawn, right? The rocks that are on the ground, to the air that is swirling around us. to the animals, to everything, right? What we consider inanimate objects, they all have energy and they're all breathing and alive. So everything is about spirit, and life is spirit, right? Because without spirit, we can't have life. And I think that in a lot of ways, I have wondered, and when Pauli had invited me to do their podcast, I think one of the things that I wondered out aloud was, if Christianity didn't go through the different formations that it has, I wonder if it would be really much more authentically connected to spirit too, right? Instead of needing a building like this, right? Or instead of needing or being union, but like having to go through the credentials of an institution. So yeah, I think about that too, but thank you.
I'm Bertram. I'm one of the chaplains here, like Pauli. And you asked the question about resilience, and maybe I'm being redundant in what you just said, but I think, especially when I encounter students here who are feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, or just people in life in general, that the thing that I come back to as a foundation for resilience is, how are you connecting with spirit? That when you're feeling like everything is chaos, and the world is chaos and violence around us, how are we connecting with spirit? Because if we go into those places and we try to take actions for change and we're not actually rooted in spirit, we're actually doing, it's like more ego activity, or we're replicating, the patterns of capitalism or violence or whatever. So when we're led by spirit, it's the resilience, it's the wisdom of spirit that guides us, that actually, in my belief, brings about the transformation that we actually need.
I completely agree, because I would actually encourage folks to just start in prayer and meditation. Yeah. And one of the things that I learned, which was a very hard lesson, is nothing is about me. Mm-hmm. Right? Like,
What?
yes, I'm just like, this is, so, sometimes I still repeat this to myself during meditation, which is like, this is not about you. This is not about you. Right? And they make it very clear that this is not about you. And this is not to say that they, and especially for, so folks who are initiated officially, this is something that came to me during prayer one day last year, which was, I clearly heard, they're like, you have to understand, you are both the offering and the altar and the priest, right? So, as someone who is initiated, that is my responsibility to keep reminding myself that it is not about me, it is about everyone and everything else. And I think that's what is hard to realize sometimes, is that I want to go out there and be in the front lines. I want to be laying out on the street getting arrested too, but is that really the right thing? Is that the right calling of the Spirit? For some people it is, and for some people it's not. And as much as I don't want to be playing a certain role, it's also about just stepping into the role, because that's your responsibility and that is how you're going to be accountable to spirit. So part of my thing is, how do I hold myself accountable to my spirits? And that is the guidance that I can't veer away from.
I would like to invite you guys, if you want to say something. I know sometimes it's, we're quiet, but I've had many people invite me to speak also. So would you like to speak or say something?
Thank you. Well, I think kind of very connected to what Pauli said. The idea of resilience to me just feels, impossible as an individual thing, and I feel really grateful for I feel like since the first time that I was here at Union, I have a distinct memory of at Admitted Students Day when Dr. Pak, before she began to speak about I don't remember what the speech was about, but I remember you started it by saying to look to your left and look to your right at the potential students around you, and that these are your teachers. And that's something that I think is reiterated often here. And I feel that both in the people around me and in the people who, I don't see or hear on the same level. But that's just where I really find a lot of the will to keep going. So thank you.
As I was listening, I know that you were also being very much involved in the church. And I'm curious, you practicing Christianity for a long time and then becoming an indigenous practices that we follow. I'm curious, how was the transition? And I feel like when I think about myself, there's so many challenges and I don't even know how to do that again. So I'm wondering how is the experience and the transition, how to unlearn and learn. So I'm curious to know that. Yeah.
That part.
I don't want to say that everything from the church was bad, but I also realized that after becoming initiated, how much of the Korean church had adopted shamanistic practices. Korean churches are the only ones who are doing daybreak services, right? That is very much shamanic based. We have certain hours when we pray, and one of them is 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., and Koreans love to do. Anyway, the transition actually was smooth. It felt like I went from wearing pants that were 3 sizes too small and trying to squeeze in to one that was just an elastic band, right? That can just move with me as I needed to move, right? That allowed me to breathe, but also be expansive and also constrict when I needed to. So that's kind of how it felt for me in terms of unlearning. It took a little bit of time. I think the notion of this punitive, capital G God was something that took a long time for me to unlearn. But really, again, prayer and meditation. Prayer is so important. And I know that sometimes people are who do I pray to? There are times, you know what? There are some folks, when I do readings with them, I'll say, oh, you know what? Your grandmother or your grandfather is very present with you. Just talk to them. That's prayer. That's what prayer is. It's a conversation. So just talk to them. And you can even just say things like, I'm just having a hard day today, right? Just letting them know. Or, you can even do some appeals to them, be like, can you just help me lighten the load a little bit for me today? And to fall back into, a Christian saying, right? Jesus said, where there are 2 or more, the Spirit abounds, right? And you're in the perfect place for that. Please take advantage of the context and the environment that you're in. Grab another student, grab another teacher, grab a peer, just ask, can we just be together, right? It doesn't have to mean that you have to have a conversation or entire discourse. Sometimes just being together in silence, you will start to feel the Spirit. And I know that there are more specific questions that you have that I can answer with you after, if that's okay.
Just want to add that, first of all, the intersections of the African American experience, the African experience, and the Korean experience. I found this also when I was in undergrad at NIAC, which eventually closed. There was a Hmong student who I think I saw a TikTok, not a TikTok, an Instagram of a Hmong woman with a bow and arrow doing something amazing. But that was all I knew until I heard their story. These band of people that people try to erase. And I was like, wow, we have something in common, you know. And Jesus, to me, was Jewish, was not trying to be anything else. He was authentically himself. And I forget that, that's a lesson, to be authentically myself. And they were very deep into ancestral worship, just their own ancestors. And so for me, you know, I'm reminded, because the Baptist Church, the Abyssinian or the African Methodist Church, also infused African traditional religion or spirituality into the Christian religion. They didn't give up. And so it's possible, it's there, it's all around us, you know, and I would definitely come to you for a reading.
Or I could connect you to other practitioners too, if you like.
Thank you for talking about resilience. I can understand it's an ability to withstand in midst of crisis, and it was something I was much needed. And when you were talking about ancestors and connecting that with spirit, and whatever is around is spirit, and spirit has life, spirit has meaning, it was so much needed for me, I mean, this moment. Thank you. Thank you.
We need to leave it there for now. So, profound gratitude for all of you who have joined us here, for those of you who are joining us later on the playback, thank you. In this moment, as we prepare to go back out into the world, may we ever be ready to be authentically ourselves, to remember that we go on the shoulders of thousands of people who have come before us, especially those who are of our heritage and our traditions. May remember that we always live together and that none of us are alone. And in the power of spirit and in the strength of the community, may we all go in peace.